Today we have an exciting guest, Darrell Heaps from Q4. Darrell, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Very excited to speak to you about the path of growth of Q4 over the last 10 years. And you guys been able to achieve some amazing milestones in terms of headcount, amount of money that you guys raised, markets you penetrated, companies you acquired. So very excited to have you here.
Wonderful. Well, it's my pleasure. And,
yeah.
This is a great series. Great to see you doing this for the Toronto tech community and just at large. I've watched some of them. They've all been great so far.
Thank you very much. So as you probably know, the focus really for this series is how do we get companies that already got traction grow faster. But I think it would be valuable to touch on a couple of things for earlier stage founders, because I've gotten quite a bit of feedback that we don't talk enough about just maybe the earlier fundamentals of companies. Mm-hmm. So one thing I would love to start with is understanding your mindset in terms of starting companies. There's kind of two schools of thought. You can have an idea first, and then you're building a team around to actually execute on the idea, or you can have team and then you just decide to come up with an idea. How did you approach building Q4, and do you think one of these ways is better than the other?
So, I mean, for me, when we started Q4, the reason why I'm pausing too is because the idea evolves. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the natural aspect, is that any idea that you have in terms of perhaps like what sector you want to get into or the industry that you want to be into, but the actual like execution of the idea inevitably evolves. So when I look at when first started Q4, we started as a really web content management system. So it was like WordPress on steroids, but targeted to public companies to manage their investor content. And that first initial idea, so I did start with the idea piece, saying, okay, like this is, because I saw an opening in the market. I liked public companies, the fact they always had to be maintaining content. And the fact that it's highly regulated and a high degree of risk means that it would be a premium product, that we wouldn't have to compete with WordPress because of all the other kind of requirements. So started with that and an initial team. So for me with Q4, started with primarily with the idea, but the team is absolutely essential, because that idea that we had, the first product and what we were going to do with it, when I look at how that evolved over the first half of the company, kind of a 5-year period, which we were really a web CMS that sold to public companies. And then it was after 5 years that there was really a pivot where we changed the approach to be, we want to take this technology and sell and create a platform for investor relations, which is web is one component of that. And that pivot to being really kind of solution oriented to solve problems within public companies from an IR perspective really expanded the product set. And so the idea went from it very much evolved from the first piece. And I think that's what's natural. So that would mean that it's very much team related. That I think team is absolutely critical at over long-term success. But I think you have to start with an idea. That's why I also think like there is a founder or there's a founding team or founding group that inevitably has to start with an idea. Like I think it's like, here's 3 people, we all seem to get along. Now let's figure out what we're going to do together. Inevitably there's an idea that will be the starting point for that company, because you can't, if there's no idea, there's no business, there's nothing to actually do. So I know I'm not giving you a clear answer of one way or the other, but I think the idea is kind of where it starts, but the team is execution. And those ideas are a dime a dozen that it really matters, and what you execute and iterate and learn on that allows you to build something.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I think that's a common perspective, that ideas are very common. It's all about execution, but it sounds like idea does matter, but it may be at different stages. Having an idea early on is very important, because that's what is going to allow you to get that initial traction. And then evolving that idea by just listening to the market, talking to customers, will help you actually get to next milestones. Yes. And that's all a function of the team that you have.
Yeah, and I think it's the idea is less about my idea is the product that does this, and more around this is the particular kind of broad market problem that we want to go after, or here's the opportunity that we see that we're going to go after. Because the idea, the specific kind of product idea, I think that's what has to evolve, because either the market will change, or you see the opportunity changing, or competitors come in and competitors take a certain approach that causes you to think, okay, we have to react, because we can't just we can't just be blinded, well, this is our idea and this is what we're going to execute. You have to kind of ebb and flow to make sure to be able to get that ongoing traction.
Makes sense. Why don't we shift gears and talk about actually later stage of your company? So
Sure.
It sounds like many companies, at least Canadian companies, are a bit afraid of going global. Obviously not Q4. You've expanded in multiple markets, gone through several acquisitions that we'll dive into a bit later. But maybe talk to us a little bit on the thought process on when you realize that you have to be global, and why do you think not enough companies do that?
So for us, probably coming back in the first 5 years of the company, which 5 years in kind of a startup's life sounds like eons. So I very much see Q4 as really kind of two companies. And the first one was that we were selling this web content management system, selling to public companies, almost selling it exclusive to Canadian companies, almost selling it. We built our first market in really selling to mining companies. So being based here in Toronto and having a couple of mining clients was pretty obvious, like, let's build the first initial market there. But it was very limiting to think that way, because really the market is much, much bigger if you look outside of Canada. Canada is a small market. And I think that our growth, to give you perspective, the first 5 years it took us to get to around 100 clients. The second 5 years we got to over 1,000. So it very much was that you're kind of grinding along for a while, and then you make some change, and then you see the real growth come. And for us, that change was to be focused almost exclusively on the US market, and to focus on the problem within the business, which was investor relations, not just being a point solution. So I think that was really eye-opening to me, and then seeing what happened with the growth. And there was some people early on that I think would say, well, Americans or the US isn't going to buy a Canadian solution. That's completely false. They don't care. Especially in today's world, like where something is built or sold out of, none of it really matters. Almost all sales happen primarily through online or through the phone, or there's not as much kind of in-person selling. Although having said that, we travel a huge amount now, all of our sales team, myself, to be able to get deals done. It's just online and phone is good, but to really move deals in person is critical. So I think that the thinking global is really around understanding your market. That it's very rare. I think that some Canadian companies, they look at it and they say, well, we're going to figure out the market here first, and then we're going to go to other markets. I think the problem in doing that is that other markets are different. So when for us, when we look at the US market, very, very different than the Canadian market. So there really wasn't much of what we learned in the Canadian market that was applicable to the US. We had to get into the market. We had to fall on our face. We had to see what was different, and we had to adjust. And each market that we've gone into, so we've recently expanded into Europe last year, and that was the same thing. We went into Europe, everything we thought we knew going in, with all our kind of pre-planning on what we thought it was going to be like. The actual market in Europe is very different, and that each country in Europe is very different. So I think the sooner that you can get in and understand that market, the better that you can then iterate and change. In a lot of cases, it's not the product itself that's different. Like for us, the technology stack in IR public companies is pretty much the same in each market, but your go-to-market is different, and what resonates and how you price it and how you package it and what the sales process is like. Your go-to-market in getting and growing your business, that's what's very, very different, because it's very, very different cultures. And also say on that, in the US is not really one country, not one market. Selling into New York is very different than selling into the Bay Area or selling into the South. I mean, those are very, very different very different cultures, that you have to have a different approach in terms. If you want to get traction, you can't just think like one size fits all. So I think it's I see more companies now, more Canadian companies, more Toronto companies that don't have that mindset. I think that's a little bit of when people say, well, Canadians don't want to build international companies, I think it's a bit of a lagging indicator statement, because most of the guys that I talk to, most of the people that I know that are running companies, they're not thinking Canadian. And that may be just kind of the way people look at the market now, that there is no physical barrier anymore. So I think it's less of a problem now than it has been in the past.
Yeah, at this point, I think if you're starting a company only targeting Canadian market, you are at a huge disadvantage. Yeah. I think you by default need to think of US from day one.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
Your expansion into Europe is something that's very interesting to me, because I feel a lot of companies think like, We're gonna, because we're based in Canada, obviously Canadian market is low-hanging fruit. United States, low-hanging fruit. Next Europe, but I feel like they discount the complexity of actually going into Europe because it sounds it's just a one entity Europe, but the reality is the countries are so different. It's completely different time zone. The business, the way business is done there is very different.
And it's those like qualitative aspects. Like market is the same. Like it would be in whatever market. So it's the same product essentially. Same market pressures as to why the product exists or the potential. But exactly that, the cultural differences. And for us, the time zone, you know, we have tons of clients on the West Coast, based here in Toronto. We've got tons of clients in the Bay Area and on the West Coast. And so dealing with that 3-hour time difference, we felt we had our hands right around it. We do have our hands right around it. Like we serve them just like they're here. But going a few more hours, another 3 or 4 hours to then sell and support into Europe, that difference in the fact that it's earlier. So if you want to staff a European coverage team here in Toronto, you have to have people that start at midnight. And you can say technically, sure, okay, so let's recruit a team and have them start at midnight. Well, finding people that will take a job and be good at it based in Toronto to do some sort of technical function and they start at midnight, that's not a big market. It's already competitive. Now you want to say, here's all the perks you get working at Q4. Oh, and by the way, you get to start at midnight. Isn't that awesome? It creates more of a recruiting challenge that I think that for us, when we expand into Europe, we underestimated. We didn't really understand what the challenges that would bring that we've had to deal with.
From tactical execution standpoint, how do you decide which countries you should penetrate? Obviously, you probably get clients from likely everywhere in the world, from many countries in Europe. Do you just go after the largest market? Like you go, naturally, if you want to go to Europe, you have to go to Germany and UK, for example. Or you actually follow your biggest customer. Like, for example, if you have historically landed a large company in Italy.
I think it's a mix. I think it's a mix because you don't want to go just blindly where, well, that's the biggest market, so that's where we should be. Now, having said that, when we decided to go into the US, it was just like, well, it's so much bigger. It's right there. That's where, especially for us being capital markets, that's like, a massive market that we needed to be in. But I think going into Europe and other regions, when we looked at Europe, so now we don't focus on in the entirety of Europe. I think when we first went into Europe, we thought, okay, let's sell everywhere. But now we have a very country by country specific, and what countries do we have outbound strategy versus inbound? But I think it's a mix because you want to see where do you have natural traction without not even trying. You're just seeing deals are coming in, and you'd say something like Germany is a hot market and we're not even trying. So then I think you want to look at, I'm not saying that is for us, but just in general. So then that balanced against the market potential. So then understanding, okay, we seem to be getting a lot of business from this market, why? And then how big is it? Is it a big enough market for us to go into? And what's the competitive, what do our competitors look like in that market? Like, and then what are the challenges? Like, we have a good amount of flow of businesses that come in from clients in like Australia. But when we look at Australia and we look at like Asia Pac, we've decided to not pursue those because of the challenges of really going after that market. And then you're dealing with like a 12-hour time difference. Like managing that business takes a big commitment. So I think it's kind of a mix of all those things coming in to then start to try to determine it. But the one thing I would say about Europe, the learning that we've had is to not think about Europe as one place, but to really understand Europe as different countries. So not having a broad European strategy, but having a strategy for the UK or for Europe or for France or for Scandinavia. Certain regions, I think you can group them together, like Scandinavia, but something like, the strategy that's going to work in the UK is not what's going to work in Germany. They're very, very different places.
But it sounds like that's why you did at least a couple of your acquisitions in Europe to be able to service clients there. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main questions that we had in going into Europe was, so we had market potential, yes, there's and our product stack and the competitiveness of that product stack. We think we had good opportunity there, but then we had to make a decision. Do we want to start by hiring a few salespeople and just get started? Or did we want to look for an acquisition opportunity to really establish a platform and then grow from that platform? And that kind of build versus buy analysis is something that spend a lot of time on. And really for us, what it came down to is speed. So when you look at the fact that we could go, if we can do this acquisition, we can get another 200 clients. And then that gives us a platform that we can then, not only gives us a platform of clients that we can sell into, but also gives us, it'll take a bit of time, but it gives us brand recognition, and it gives us the ability to have a momentum right out of the gate, versus you go into a market, no one's ever heard of you, and you're like, oh, hi, this is what we do. And they're like, well, who do you work with here? And it's like, no one, we're looking for the first lucky customer. It's a very different conversation than saying we've got 200 clients and here's your peers that we're already working with and using that as a leverage point. Yeah. So it was something that was our second acquisition, and it was similar to the first one as well. It's really, for us, those decisions have been kind of strategic based on time, that we could save ourselves, like in that case with Europe, save what would take us probably 2 years or 3 years or something like that.
So it sounds like fundraising and acquisitions, or M&A, they're somewhat similar in the sense that there's kind of this two parts to it. You fundamentally should be building business that's just absolutely killing it. So for example, for that company in Europe to be discovered by you, that meant probably they have to do a great job at actually growing their business, right? For you to close business from VCs would come down to you actually doing a great job on growing your business. But at which point do you think personal relationship come into play, and to which degree do you think they matter when actually executing these deals?
Well, so one, in terms of finding those pieces, the personal relationship, you're kind of networking to find as well. So I think being connected into your market, but it all comes back, the first thing, it all comes back to your vision and strategy, because I think that's what forms the ability to raise money. That's what forms the ability to acquire other entities, because what you don't want to do is kind of be like, oh, someone tees up an opportunity, like, here's a company, do you want to acquire it? And you're like, and then you go down a path of like, how could I fit that in? Yeah. I think that's a big mistake, because then I think what ends up happening is that you're not driving to a strategy, you're being opportunistic. And so we've said no to tons, way more than we've actually said yes to, because pretty much anything that comes inbound, like, do you want to look at this? It's almost always a no. Yeah. Because you really want to not only have it be part of strategy, but you want to make sure to really understand what it is that you're buying, because you're really going to live with it. That if you're looking at something like has huge opportunity, it's shiny, it's bright, but I don't really understand that business, but if we acquire it, they understand that business, so we'll acquire it. I think that's disaster in the making. But when it comes down to personal relationships, it's really around, and I've gained a lot more respect for this aspect of acquisitions, is culture and integration. And that comes down to people. So like at the end of the day, when you look at some deal and all financial strategy, everything, and here's all the reasons why it fits. At the end of the day, you are hiring and you're going to work with a whole group of new people. So you really want to make sure and dig in deep in terms of who you're getting in bed with, and that you think that's going to work. Or as you get in, okay, it's going to work with these people, but these people aren't going to work, and that's part of your plan in terms of how you're going to execute. But it comes down to, at the end of the day, you're working with people, and for us, the first deal was really good because the CEO of that company and myself really saw eye to eye, and we're entirely partners in growing the business today. That he runs the intelligence business, and it wasn't, that relationship has been really paramount in being able to have the success that we've had. So in the end, it comes down. So the challenge is if it's entrepreneur led, then it's with the CEO and the management team. But if it's corporately owned and you're buying like an asset from another large corporate, then really understanding who's going to run it post, and that integration kind of post deal. That's what I've learned over the few that we've done, is like that's the harder piece as well, because once you come out of the honeymoon, getting a deal done is exciting. Like if you've raised money, it's exciting. It's a win. And it's the same thing in getting a deal done. You acquire a company, you come out of that, everybody is hyped when you're going through it. When you do the final, I was going to say signing, no one signs anything anymore. It's always this anticlimactic docu-sign thing, which sucks, by the way. It used to be so much more like, fulfilling to sign something. Now it's like everything's so automated. But I think once you're out of the honeymoon, then you have to live with these people. And then you're working with them, and you know what it's like. Everyone knows it's like building a company. It's not like everything just is easy. So then you get into the trenches, and then you get into situations where we thought this was going to happen and this happened. So now we have to deal with it. So So trying to think through what's this person going to be like, or what's this team going to be like when things don't go according to plan, which at least in my experience and most people I've spoken to, a lot of things don't go according to plan, and you have to adjust. So that personal aspect is really important.
Are there any tactical lessons or tips that you can share when it comes down to kind of preparing for the worst case scenario?
Like in terms of acquisitions?
Yeah, sure.
It's really just trying to spend.
Because sorry to interrupt you, and it's not unlike just partnerships in general, right? Big partnerships in many ways probably act like acquisitions.
Yes. Because you invest a huge amount of time and effort into getting it done. And on the acquisition side, I think it's just spending as much time as you can with who you're who is going to be the ending management team that you're working with. And that includes not spending all that time in a boardroom or not spending all that time negotiating, but it's spending time getting to know them personally, because you're going to spend a huge amount of time with them. But I don't think there's any magic formula. I mean, it's the same thing when you're recruiting. You're going to add someone to the company, and if it's a really critical role, you get a certain amount during the recruiting process, and then you have to take a leap of faith. So I wish I had a magic, like a better formula.
But I got two lessons out of it. So one of them is definitely don't make be careful about making opportunistic assumptions about acquiring teams or making partnerships where you're not 100% sure how that fits into your strategy, but maybe a big partner comes to you and you think that if we partner up, maybe something interesting will come out of it. From our experience, that usually is a waste of time, unless there's a very clear strategy of how it fits into your roadmap. And the second one is just spend more time with people that you're doing business with.
Yes. Yeah. Because if you're going to do that, if you're going to, it's like don't get married without spending a lot of time with the person that you're going to get married to, because you're going to be married, and that's what when they're looking at acquisitions or those types of things. I mean, it's a big. Don't underestimate how much it changes your company, because it does change it, which in a good way too. I mean, that's why you're doing it, is to affect change.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm not eating the mic.
So my next question would be on your point about building stronger teams, and I read your recent article on kind of the growing complexity of an organization as you scale up. One of the big points is around alignment. Maybe you can share some tips on how do you run your management team to make sure that everybody understands what's going on in a complex organization like yours.
So for us, we focus a lot on cadence. So like frequency of meetings and sync ups, because I think the challenge, and we have a pretty distributed team now, like lots of folks do, but for us, we've got people in Toronto, New York, London, and then spread across the US in a bunch of places. And so just from the management team perspective too, they're not all in Toronto. That was the other thing too in doing acquisitions, that really appreciating, like, if you're not distributed and then you're going to become distributed, the extra effort that you have to put in place in order to keep everything aligned. So that is, I do like weekly status and sync up meetings with everyone on the management team. We do like weekly stand up. We do monthly what we call mom meetings, monthly operation management meetings, and then quarterly meetings that are synced up along with board reporting. So trying to keep that very, very that cadence being very tight. And that the other aspect is just try to be really, like for me, I try to be super sensitive of misalignment and seeing things like, okay, because I think you try to get everything running perfectly, and perhaps it feels like everything's running perfectly, and that lasts for like a moment. And it's like nothing stays static. So either you're getting more alignment and things are working better and better, or alignment is diverging and things are working not as good. Yeah. But there is no flat line, because just everything's so fluid when you're working. So I think being sensitive to that, and so having lots of discussions. Now, having said that, the challenge of doing that is that you can't, as the company grows, you have to delegate more and more of that, because like I can't, if I did that with everyone that I want to talk to, I mean, that's all I would do. So I think there is that kind of structural aspect as the company grows is also really important, that you do have to create more structure, and then it's also like how's your management team, how are they managing their team, and how are they managing their team. But I think running like a flat organization, at least for us, at a certain point you have to start to put more structure in place, just so that you can more effectively manage and not just be spending all your time getting status updates on what's going on. Obviously you want to drive change and improvement. So that's primarily how it works, but it's just an incredible amount of effort to stay in touch with everyone and force constant communication with the expectation that things are constantly breaking. So you have to be on top of acknowledging when it's breaking and fixing it.
So one of, probably you briefly touched on this, is one of the, I would say, pitfalls of actually continuously growing an organization is really having founders that don't let go of kind of day-to-day operations in many ways. Once you have a management team in place that is in charge of kind of the frontline team that's maybe customer success and so forth, in which capacity do you involve, or in which capacity do you spend time with them, not just with your management team, but kind of a layer below them?
So that's something, so we're just in the process now of implementing what is called, or we're calling skip level, which is something we're just putting in place. So I was doing that kind of on an ad hoc basis, but in an effort to build more transparency throughout the company, so that understanding what's it like one level below, and having more transparency overall in terms of how the company is operating. I'm looking forward to having that. So we haven't implemented it until as of late, but looking forward to doing it.
Okay. To wrap up, a couple quick questions. What do you think is the number one startup risk?
Number one startup risk, that's a good question. I think the number one risk is the founder or the founding team not being resilient. And accepting failure, or not being ready it takes a certain type of person to be able to kind of to weather the storm. That starting a company is full of risks, and coming back, it does not work. It only is like the perseverance of the founder or the founding team. I say that too because sometimes it's an individual, sometimes it's 2 people or 3 people, or that team has to be committed to pushing through all of the stress and the uncertainty. There was many times in our starting Q4 where we're like a hair away from failure. I'm not talking failure like, oh, fail fast, learn, and keep going. I'm talking like no more money, it's done. And that happened. It didn't just happen once. Like there's many times throughout the early periods, and even as the company grows, there's also periods where there's lots of analogies, but like you fly really close to the sun. Like you try to push, it doesn't quite work, but it does work to a degree. Having the ability to persevere through that, I think, is the most important. That's more important than money, than product, than skill, than everything. Is because without that, if you have the leaders of the company capitulate and say, like, I can't do this, or I'm just going to throw the towel in, well, then that's exactly what happens in failure. So I think ultimately, because the idea will change, the people will change, the money is always, money is certainly the gas, the fuel that you need to grow, you need to create anything, but that kind of approach to the business, I think, is what is the absolute number one skill. Because anyone who failed, well, they certainly gave up. Like the correlation of that is really, really strong. Now, having said that, there's some businesses that, for whatever reason, they just won't work. So you get to a point where the founding team, everyone behind it, they really do believe, and they try, and they're just the timed wrong in the market, or for whatever reason, it doesn't work. So that does happen, but I think in more cases, it comes down to that approach. Because if your product or your market isn't going to work, you should also be really realistic about that, and then take this amazing team and talent that you have and pivot and find something that does work. And there's tons of stories out there in the world about companies that were kind of trading along, doing okay, and then that wasn't working. They took that amazing team and applied it to a new idea, and they had success. So that comes back to that. It's just that resilience to, building a company is full of headwinds. As you know, like it's, some days you feel like you wake up and it's just like you're getting punched in the face constantly. And so it's taking that and to keep going, which is, is the essential ingredient, which comes back to that. Not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone signs up to do that. So that's why, there's people that start companies, and then there's people that join companies a little bit later on. They're different types of people, which are all equally as important.
Darrell, thank you so much for coming. It was very insightful.
I think this is awesome. I'm pleased to be a part of it. Thanks.
Cheers.